Hello and welcome to Legally Speaking with me, Tarun Nangia. Today, we are going to record a show to celebrate the life of senior advocate Fali Sam Nariman, who passed away recently at the ripe old age of 95. He lived a full life, as many people would say. And so, it is an occasion to celebrate his life and actually go back and look at all the achievements and what the human being that he was. That a lot of people would like to know, many anecdotes from the years gone by, and much more. And who better than in the part 1 of this show, Mr. Raian Karanjawala, managing partner of Karanjawala and Company, one of India's leading litigation law firms at the Supreme Court. He joins me. Good to see you again. And first of all, your opening comments on senior advocate Fali Nariman.
Well, while this show may have a aspect of celebrating his life, Fali's death yesterday was a loss both to the courts and to the nation, because a voice of conscience has been lost, a very wise voice has been lost. And Fali was a person who over the years had evolved and evolved to reach a stage where when Fali made a point, most people in the intelligentsia chose to sort of think about it and ponder on it and appreciate it. So in a sense, it's a loss to both the court and the country.
Okay. But I want to start from the beginning. When did you get to know the gentleman that was Fali Sam Nariman? How long ago was that?
So I actually got to see him before I got to know him. And I'll tell you why I'm saying this. This was the year 1973, early part of 1973. Delhi University had seen an agitation the year earlier, and Sriram Khanna had been rusticated. He was the former DUSU president. He was a friend of mine. He was also a friend of my erstwhile friend, my late friend Arun Jaitley. And we were all in student politics together. So one day, Arun told me, look, Ram Khanna's case is being argued in the High Court. So why don't we just go from college and we'll go there? And we'll see how the case goes. It'll give a little bit of support, moral support to Ram Khanna. So Arun and I trooped up to the High Court, Delhi High Court. I forget now which court or who the judge was. But very interestingly, both the advocates arguing on both sides were to have a large impact on my career and my life in the years to come. On the side of appearing for Ram Khanna was Justice Tarkunde, who later on went on to become my father-in-law. And obviously that impacted my career and everything else. And on this side, appearing for the government was the then Additional Solicitor General, F.S. Nariman. And I still remember, when Fali had, those who knew Fali, especially in his earlier years, he had a very vibrant and sort of penetrating kind of voice. So suddenly, we were not even law students in those days. I was in Shriram College. Suddenly, I remember Fali jumping up and interrupting, and the case went on, and then it got adjourned and so on. So that's when I first heard of Fali Nariman. Then one day, this was sometime in July, Raian Nariman joined the college. And Arun told me, remember Fali, we'll go and see him. His son has joined. So come, I'll introduce you. He's a Parsi, you're a Parsi. So I hopped across and I met Raian, and we became friends, and we became fast friends, and we were friends throughout years from then onwards. So Raian and I became friends, and one fine day, he said, Raian, why don't you come over home for lunch? It was a Saturday. So I said, sure, I'll come over home for lunch. So I hopped across. Fali was living then in, I think, what was called 7 Safdarjung Lane, as the Additional Solicitor General, one of those big houses. So then I must have trooped up at about 12 or 11:30 or 12, and Raian said, you want to play cricket? So I said, sure. I don't mind. Now, I was never a sports person. But, I thought, if you looked at Raian, he was a tubby in those days, and, one didn't really expect him to be a fast bowler. So Fali looked at Raian and said, and Fali had a nasal voice. He said, Baba, don't injure Raian. Baba, don't injure Raian. I just looked in his direction. What are we talking? Anyway, I went into bat and Rohinton came up, and zoom, the ball just whizzed past. I said, oh. Second time the ball whizzed past. I said, boss, I'm not playing. I just put the bat down. I would have definitely been injured that day. So then we became friends. And the Nariman house was a very warm house. Hospitality was sort of flowing all the time. That was largely because of Pepsi, and that's Fali's wife. And I still remember, during our first year of practice at the law, both Rohinton used to work in Venugopal's office. I had been put by Fali, and it was Fali who helped me. I must straight away say that he's been a sort of a mentor to me, because after Shriram College, when I needed admission in government law in Bombay, it was Nariman, or rather his wife, who sort of put in a good word. I'd gone to, I was in Bombay for something or the other, and he said, come over to my suite and meet me at this time in the morning. And when I went there was a gentleman called Dr. Rafiq Dada, who was a professor at government law college at the time. And Pepsi just caught him and collared him and said, no, Rafiq, you have to help Raian out. He's a close friend of but he's a very good boy. He's a very good boy. And so I got admission to government law. Equally, when it came to the profession, I obviously went to, and by then Rohit and I were very close friends, and I had spent a lot of time in the Narima household, and I was like almost like, nobody's really a family member, but I was almost like one of the family, in terms of eating and spending time and so on and so forth. So I hopped across and said to Rohit, just ask Fali, who should I join and where do I join? So he said he joined the Adarsh Indian Company, which was the biggest firm at that time. So I said, sure. So they went and talked to Jimmy. Jimmy said, no, I can't say no to, he told Rohit, I can't say no to your father, of course. And Jimmy uncle knew my father also. But then Jimmy was those days hopping all over the world. So he'd come back for a day, and then, yes, Fali, I'll do something. Next time you ask, where is Jimmy? Jimmy is sitting in this thing, New York. Then you wait for a week, you come back. Jimmy's come back, but yesterday he went off to Italy. And he went on like this for about, I think, 2 weeks or something. And then Fali said, Cholo isko. And he called me and said, listen, I have decided you joined Parekh and Company, which was a fantastic decision from my point of view, because Praveen at that time in the Supreme Court had the biggest litigation there was. That was a bigger firm, because it was a full-size corporate firm and so on. But the Praveen was a big litigating firm, and that's how I joined Praveen. So when we were working in our first year together, Rohinton was with Venugopal. Because he'd also finished college, he was with Venugopal. I was with Praveen Bhai. So we used to sort of, and both of us were unmarried. So I'd finish my work, hop across to the Nariman household. We'd have dinner at Pepsi's house. And Pepsi was a very, very good cook. And those days, she was particularly adept at it. She'd read some 9 or 10 cookbooks. So, and then we'd go off to the Machan, which had just opened. We'd go off to the Machan and all of us would sit. Mukul would come, others would come, and we'd all gas, and then we'd Rohinton. My house was a little further away from Rohinton. Rohinton would drop me home in his car, and so that's how the relationship became, and then that's how I and Fali got bonded. Now, the other thing was that when we were in Praveen Parikh's firm, Fali was the go-to counsel as far as possible, as far as Praveen Parikh was concerned. We had a lot of other counsel we went to. There was Soli, there was Anil Diman, there was P.R. Mridul, there was a young couple at times in the later years, and so on. There were a lot of others also, but my father-in-law, Justice Tarkunde, Dr. Chitle, there were a lot of other counsel also, but Fali was one of the go-to counsel. So we used to be, more often than not, 3 times out of 5, at Fali's house in the morning, 8:30, either very hot summers or cold winters, waiting to get our foot into the door and start our conferences. And that's how we sort of grew and evolved. And Fali was a very distinctive style of working also. So it was very interesting to work with him.
So I would want to know from you, because you've spoken about Mr. Fali Nariman being briefed. How was his style of advocacy? If you could delve into that aspect as well.
So there were 2 aspects to Fali Nariman's advocacy. One was, what was his style of conferring like? And the other was, what was his style of arguing like? Now, conferences could be held. Because, you have to remember in those days, the concept of the junior counsel hadn't started in the Delhi bar. So it was either us who had to prepare the brief and go and get ready and brief Narima, or sometimes in a very heavy matter, a counsel from Bombay would also come down and then he would conduct the conference. And sometimes, of course, Praveen Bhai himself would be there to conduct the conference. And that's how the conferences went. Now, you must remember one thing, that most of these counsels, for admissions, and they used to do about 10 or 15 admissions a day normally, especially on the miscellaneous days, would give their admission conferences in the morning. So Fali from 8 o'clock in the morning or 8:30 in the morning went on till about 10:05. Then he got into the car and went straight to the court at 10:30 and started his matters. Now, in that 120 minutes, you had to brief him different people had to brief him in about 8 to 10 matters at least. And matters are very often in which he knew nothing. So those conferences were often pretty nerve-wracking, because what used to happen is Fali had a phenomenal grasp of matters, and he was a super fast reader. He's one of the fastest readers I've seen. Yes, I've seen it. Yes, come on now. Where is that? So the conferences were like a sparring match, except that we were getting swatted. We were not doing the sparring. So he would say, but I want to see that. Wait, show me that. So one of the juniors would pull out that page and show it. In the meanwhile, you were looking for something else. It was a sort of a chaotic sort of situation, but somehow Fali always, managed, most of the councils were like that. They managed to come out on top and sort of this thing. A lot of other councils used to read a lot earlier, but neither Narima nor Sorabi had that habit very much. So very often when you went into a conference, they were seeing the brief for the first time. And so obviously it was a bit nerve-wracking. Fali's style of advocacy was very, very sort of power-packed. It was like, I remember after one big matter that he had won, UCO Bank or something, in our chamber, he had been nicknamed the Cannon because he used to go, tan, 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 tan. That's how he used to argue, And Fali had a different way of conducting a case. And the real Nariman came out when you briefed him in a heavy filing hearing. See, in an admission, what happens is that you argue before the Supreme Court for 5 and 10 minutes. So it's a matter of hit and chance and what the judge wants to hear and what the judge doesn't want to hear. And not much advocacy can come out. A lot does. But the real test of a counsel is when he's arguing a full-length filing hearing. And that is where Fali was very different from everyone else. First, he had one basic rule, which is that he never discussed forget us, because he didn't really require our inputs on strategy. But even if an eminent counsel or top-notch junior counsel from Bombay had come down, Fali would look at us for the facts and citing of the law and to look up things. He would never discuss strategies. So there was no situation where he would say, okay, now, this judge is that. Slowly sometimes would. Ashok, they say sometimes would. But he would never say, no, this judge is like this, so we will approach it this way. He never discussed strategy with anybody. His strategy was his own and he kept it to himself and he shared it with nobody. So very often you were as startled as the other side was. That was one thing I sort of noticed about him, which was that he used the juniors around him for absorbing facts, for having the law looked up, for absorbing the law, but not to discuss how he would handle the case, what point he would take first, what point he would take second, what he would do. Secondly, Fali was always very receptive to the bench at hand. So I'll give you one example. There was a judge. I don't think I'd name him. He's a South Indian judge, the Delhi High Court. Very good judge, very eminent. But he was extremely vain. Extremely vain. He's no more. But he was extremely vain. He was a very likable and nice man. And he would always say, later on, when he stopped practicing and when he stopped being a judge and he would be practicing with us, he would always say, I put it beautifully and this, in my own beautiful way, I said this and this. So he was extremely vain. Talat Ansari tells me this story. So it is about final hearing matter in which there was one very good point in favor of Fali Nariman's side. Talat was in JBD and Talat, I wasn't in the matter. Talat was sort of leading. So this matter reached about 3:20. And Fali kept on, skirting the facts, tingling with some fact here, pointing out some fact there, but he never stated the point. And then I kept on saying, my God, why is he not saying it? Let's say it. This is the thing in our favor. He just waited. Till suddenly that judge said, but isn't this the point? And he said, yes, my lord, you're absolutely right. And after that, he won the case because the other side just couldn't say anything because the point which he would have made was actually became the judge's point. And the judge was so vain that he would never have dislodged his own point to hold in favor of the other side. So that was Fali's strategy. He approached different benches, deciding, who was what. So that was one thing. He never. Secondly, I remember, and I mentioned in an article, Pallavi Shroff told me, in the old days, and this is, of course, we're now talking about the big cases that he argued, escorts was a huge case. The escorts was thought to be taken over. They went to court. He fought it out in the Bombay High Court. He won. Then he came to the Supreme Court. Pallavi says that his whole argument in the Bombay High Court went in one direction. He completely changed his argument. It may not have gone in a different direction, but he completely changed his argument in the escorts case in the Supreme Court because he realized it was a different bench. They weren't going to buy what the Bombay High Court so easily bought. He had to produce something else to convince them. So, that is what you see. And Pallavi was appearing for LIC in those days. So, Pallavi Shroff, Shardul Ramadan. So, that is what you see when you get, that is what you realize with Fali. Fali had one other skill which almost no other counsel had. Two other skills. One is his reading of the bench was probably better than most. If at all, Soli was a little bit of a match for that. Soli was equally very good at reading the bench, what the judge wanted to hear, what was the judge's unconscious bias to which you had to sort of, they often say that a judge in some matters has an unconscious bias. He leans in a direction. You have to see which direction he leans in and take the case in that direction to convince him to decide in your favor. So Fali had a sort of a sixth sense as to what to say before what judge. And that was one other great trait of his in advocacy. And of course, the most important thing about Narima when arguing a big case was that, and this I've seen in only one other counsel that I have experienced with, that was Dipankar Gupta, who was our Solicitor General at one stage and then in private practice, that as the case went on, he got better. Normally what happens is that if the case has gone on for, say, 25 days, then on the 26th day, you're quite fed up of the whole thing and you don't want to keep on going over the same. Nariman was different. Every day, as the case went on and on, he got deeper into it, looked for something else. So he was always probing to see how he could sort of win. He had a killer instinct insofar as victory is concerned, He could just, bam, if he saw that it was coming his way, he would just hone in. I suppose all the great advocates do, but certainly Fali did.
Now, if you could reflect on two aspects. What was the later years of his life like? If you could reflect on that.
So let's look at Fali. I would say that from 1980, 81, early 80, 81, 82, it's very difficult to say, all the way to the year 2005, he was the dominant counsel of India. It's not that there were counsels who were not as good as him. Like, for example, Ashok Sen, who was a generation older, Palkiwala, who was a generation older. Both were brilliant. Ashok Sen's knowledge of law, I think nobody else really had. But Ashok Sen used to have long sabbaticals because he'd become a minister, he would go into politics and go up and down. Palkiwala, though he was also outstanding, and when I asked Fali some years ago, I said, your opinion, Fala, who is the best? He said, none. So Fali's own view was that Nani was the best advocate he had ever seen. But Palkiwala mortgaged himself to Bombay House. So a lot of his time just got spent with the Tatas and he never really gave the bar as much as he could have to, you know. For Fali, law was an all-consuming passion. And if they say that law is a demanding mistress, then Fali was one of its most ardent suitors. Because Nariman's life had nothing much beyond the law, in the sense that, for example, I'll just give you a contrast. His son, Rohinton. Rohinton is deeply religious. So he spent hours, years and years of reading up on comparative religious history itself. He loves music. So he must be having 5, 7, 10,000 hours of music in his head. So if he comes into a room and a particular piece is playing, if classical music, a particular piece is playing, he can just phone in on that moment and then take it in his mind or to and he's getting it right, So music has been as big a passion for Rohinton as it has been for as the law. Sirvai was as fond of literature and poetry as he was of the law. Fali, the law was his passion. The courts, the law, the arguments. His life revolved around that. He didn't have too many other hobbies. He was not a gardener, none of that. The thing. And his life was very well divided also in this way that I think early on, Bepsi decided, I'll leave the law to Fali and I'll take care of everything else, which is how the house worked, And you would have a situation where she, like for Fali, for example, like me, never believed in buying property. He was property averse. Bepsi forced him to buy the house that he lived in and they lived in. Bepsi and Fali always said that, I didn't have the money, I had to take a loan, but then Bepsi just said, nothing doing. You're buying this house, and that's it. Then they went ahead and bought the house. So stuff like that. And then Bepsi would do, help him take care of all the entertaining and all. In those days, they were very good entertainers, A lot of people would, and because I was called to most of the parties, so a lot of people would flow in and out, the British High Commissioner, Australian judges, eminent people from all walks of life came and went through their doors, so that was how it was. So Fali basically just said to himself that, look, I'm going to be at the law. The other thing he was very particular about was any speech that he made. That was one thing that he always worked extra on. Suppose you were sitting in the court and you saw Narima working away furiously on some piece of paper, you could rest assured it was neither a petition nor an opinion. It was a speech that he was going to deliver somewhere down the road in a day or two. And he used to work and rework and work and rework. And I remember at one stage, he had said, or Bepsi had mentioned, that he used to make a lot of radio speeches in those days because TV was not so prevalent in the early part. So made a lot of radio speeches. He was judged to be the best radio speaker that had come across in English, because his speech had a lot of interesting anecdotes. It had humor. It was just, even today, if you go back to some of his speeches and see them, just now, I missed it, but I see it on YouTube, the Sunanda Bhandare Memorial Lecture. Fali was outstanding. Manik, my wife, saw it and said, you should go and hear it only for the way Fali spoke.
In fact, if I want to extend this to a question, I would like to ask you, what was Fali Nariman's public persona like, his participation at the bar, parliament?
So I'm thinking. So I was giving you his life, right? Then, somewhere in 85, 86, he got into a slightly controversial zone when he appeared for Union Carbide. Union Carbide, this thing. So he appeared for Union Carbide, and he, that was a case which suddenly started, the public started reacting. My God, everyone died in Bhopal. So many people are hurt. So many people are still coughing away. Why is this man appearing, and so on and so forth. So 86 onwards, for some years, Union Carbide occupied his mind. Then, of course, that case got settled. There was a review. There was a fight over it, and so on. It all went on. And Fali was back in the swim of practice. So he would at that time speak once in a while on issues. But I think his public persona really developed when in the, I think 99 or 98, I forget, 99, he was nominated to the Rajya Sabha. It was by the BJP government. Now, Nariman had one thing about him, which is that he was largely apolitical. He didn't belong to or affiliate himself with any political party. But he stood for causes of the moment. Like he was Mrs. Gandhi's additional Solicitor General. But when emergency was declared, he resigned. The cause took over and the duty towards the people who elected him took a back seat. So even when he was a Rajya Sabha member, that's when his conscience started speaking out. So there would be many occasions when he would say things which the government of the day didn't agree with or didn't want him to say, but he said it. And that's how I think his public persona started slowly developing. And once that happened, then, once you get into that zone, then things take a flow and ebb. And then, as you grow in years, and the good thing about Nariman was that as he grew in years, he just, despite having had such a high stature at such an early age, he just continued to grow in stature. There came a time when all the judges of the Supreme Court were little juniors when he died at 95. 75 years of his life was spent practicing law. So all 54 of them, he was a senior counsel. So all the judges of the Supreme Court had either been his juniors or had wanted to be his juniors or had seen him in matters or seen him opposed. So, you acquire a sort of a reverence. Judges also, treat you better. You then can say things that would be brushed aside when said by other people. That's when you acquire that sort of eminence grace, that stature which allows you to say what you really believe in. And then Fali became very modulated. See, Fali had one good quality, which was that he never spoke on everything. It wasn't that he would belong to a particular political party and then everything the party said he echoed. No. He basically spoke few, far between, but with wisdom and with a lot of circumspection and care. So that what happened was that anybody who heard him said, oh, this man is making sense. Then what started happening was that people started saying, oh, he's saying it, then it must be sensible. He acquired that stature, and that's how his public persona grew. I don't think prior to him being in the Rajya Sabha, and he enjoyed his Rajya Sabha years, because he always liked speaking, he always liked issues on which his intellectual grasp could, sort of grapple with. So he enjoyed those years, and that's how I think his public persona grew. That's my view of it.
Thank you for sharing and taking us through the life of Fali Sam Nariman. Indeed, well-lived 95 years. And you shared anecdotes with us beautifully. These anecdotes will be cherished by generations to come, and a sea of lawyers and judges will watch this.
So I always told my daughter that because, she worked with him on one very big case. I said, one of the great advantages that you've had is that you've worked with Nariman. Frankly, I'm sure the counsels of today are very good in their own right, and I'm sure they are and they do well. But I don't really think you're going to see another Nariman or another Jethmalani or even another Swarajji or even another Parasan or Venugopal. They were all a different breed. They were born in a different time. They had to work much harder to achieve what they achieved. And, the thing about all of them was that they were not, and this is one very great quality that both Fali and Soli had. They were never crazy about money. Ashok Sen used to be, and people used to have lots of stories about him and so on. But they were never crazy about money. And the other thing about them, look at how dedicated they were to their craft. None of them ever traveled in a big car of their own. Some friend comes and gives them a lift, is different. But their cars were always much smaller than what they could afford. Only so that it was in sync with what the judges wrote. Because they knew in the back of their minds that, that was where Fali's courtcraft and Fali's brain and Soli's courtcraft was. They knew that the minute we take a big car and come flashing into the Supreme Court, the judges are going to start getting irritable. And that's not what we want them to do, because we live in their world and we want them to be always looking at us with fondness. So none of the showing off came out. There was no showing off with them. That's how they were.
Thank you for all the anecdotes, and it was really a pleasure to have you share with us, and for the audience too. It's indeed something which will be cherished for years to come. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.